Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with all of you today, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to Pattern for Progress' monthly housing webinar series. Our monthly webinar series has been graciously sponsored by NeighborWorks America. This month's webinar is the first in a series of 3 sessions specifically dedicated to sustainable development and demand for low-carbon buildings. Pattern is pleased to be partnering with our longtime supporter, the Community Preservation Corporation, on this virtual series. These 3 webinars will offer best practices and solutions on how sustainable development can be achieved specifically through the lens of multifamily property development. Today's topic is multifamily developers choosing high performance. In August, we will be discussing how to save energy and reduce carbon through downtown revitalization. In our September session, we'll be discussing the financing of high performance. We have a very busy morning, so I want to quickly frame today's conversation. As we transition to a low carbon economy, states, counties, cities, towns, villages across the country are rapidly adopting low carbon goals as there is growing pressure to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. We're entering a new phase in real estate development where high performance will become the new baseline. High performance construction serves the multifamily sector's best interests. It reduces negative health outcomes, increases resilience, and reduces utility costs for owners and renters. Earlier in the week, we were having a great pre-webinar meeting to discuss today's content with the moderator and panelists. And we noted there are many terms, buzzwords, phrases when speaking about the topic of energy and efficiency and green building. What do they all mean? How do we connect the dots between the words and the real world? Sustainability, resiliency, net zero, carbon neutral, oh my. How do these phrases mix with affordable housing? You will hear from professionals this morning talking about how the designs and construction techniques are not just for luxury and high-end buildings, it is a necessity for all buildings in all markets. How does a developer, builder, and general contractor link the new techniques and building requirements together that ultimately leads to the creation of multifamily housing? There are lots of new requirements and regulations, and building innovation often begins with affordable housing. Our panelists will certainly be getting into much, much greater detail. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please use the Q&A box to post questions, and we'll do our best to fit them in at the end of the panel discussion. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's panel. Yatza Frank is an architect, writer, and educator with nearly 20 years experience in green building and sustainability. As managing director, strategy, and programs for the not-for-profit Building Energy Exchange, Yatza has been instrumental in the creation of their Energy and Lighting Efficiency Resource Center in Manhattan and guides the focus of their education, research, and exhibit programs. He is also adjunct associate professor at New York University in the Urban Design and Architecture program. Yatza's diverse background working in both the private and nonprofit sectors allows him to balance both the visionary and practical considerations of advancing sustainability in the built environment. Good morning, Yatza. You have now the con.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Why don't we have my fellow conversants turn on their video as well, and we will get started here. Thanks to all the attendees for joining us this morning. And thanks so much to Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress for inviting us to participate this morning. I have been on a panel once before with the folks here for a CPC event and hugely enjoyed that conversation, and personally really inspired by the work that's being done by the folks that are with us this morning. So I'm really looking forward to this. So I will start just by quickly introducing who all of our attendees will have the benefit of hearing from this morning. I'll start with our dynamic duo of Zavilla Jackson Preston and Vogue Jackson. A family affair. Zavilla is a registered architect with more than 25 years of experience and is the principal of JP Design Group, a family-owned and operated design and development firm. Her primary focus at JPD is providing a full array of architectural services while focusing on the mathematics of carbon neutrality and also going beyond that and sort of balancing material and equipment efficiencies and recognizing the interconnection of the social, physical, environmental, and cultural vitality of a given community, project, or client. Doing really, really inspiring work. Alongside Vogue Jackson, her director of development at JPD, and I think Jack of all trades as well, Jackie of all trades, I should say, where she does all the research about potential development sites, generates financial models, secures financing, and really helps develop the vision and theme for each project that the firm works on. Her goal is that 100% of JPD's projects be carbon neutral or better, carbon positive moving forward. We also have with us Ryan Wallace. Ryan is both a partner in the Solar Village Company and CEO of Solar Home Factory. Following about 20 years of solar panel installation work, Ryan and his team constructed a modular home factory in 2018 that only manufactures net zero housing. The team constructed the first net zero modular housing development in the United States, located in right here in Geneva, New York. This 18-unit development produces 30% more energy than it uses. Reflect on that for a moment. Most projects are trying to use 30% less than they used to. That's a pretty staggering and impressive figure. The company is now expanding the factory to build multifamily structures across the Northeast with a goal of 500 new net zero apartments per year, all from a single factory in Geneva, New York. So as you can tell, this is a group of folks that are really focused on the cutting edge, and doing so from a local base, as it were, from a relatively small foundation. These are not giant companies, but they're doing really, really impressive and really, really important work. And I think there may be some tangential lessons in there for all of us about how an economy grows into innovative things from the ground up. But I'd like to begin asking each of you to sort of talk a bit about your work. Each of you are pursuing sort of different types of high performance projects. And I wonder if you could each tell us about the type of work that you're focused on generally, and sort of how you define high performance or sustainability. Zavilla, would you like to sort of start there along with Vogue? Oh, you're still muted. Everybody gets one of those.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And one, I just want to say thank you for inviting us to this conversation this morning and to say hello to all of the attendees. So my definition of sustainability is very broad. As was said, I'm a registered architect, and most people think about sustainability in terms of building efficiencies, thermal transference and heating and cooling and all of these kinds of things, what kind of equipment goes into the building. And certainly that fits into my definition of sustainability, and it's a huge factor in work and looking at work. But for me, sustainability, as you aptly said, also as you described me, that it transfers to me into the community's goals and what the client and cultural sustainability and all of these other things that make a building. So it can't, for me, just be about the building, but I also have to think about the sustainability of the occupants in terms of their psychological well-being, because the built environment has a huge impact on one's psychological well-being. And so when I think about sustainability, I think about bedrooms that are bigger than 80 square feet that some guidelines allow for. I think about bathrooms that are bigger than 35 square feet. And so all of that to me goes into the mix to create a real environment that sustains human beings. Because, you know, we can talk about energy modeling, but outside of the body temperature for a human being, that's not really factored into the energy modeling. So I feel it's incumbent upon me as an architect to broaden that definition and make sure that I'm thinking holistically about the occupants for the building.
Right. And Vogue, what can you add to that sort of description of a definition of sustainability from the economic mindset that I think you have?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what makes us a good team, that, you know, she really focuses on the inhabitants and how the actual physical structure will work, whereas I'm focused to make sure that not only is it a profitable endeavor, but also that for the occupants, it's not a financial burden. So in order to create these sort of sustainable environments, it can't be so expensive that I go into the hole and I don't want to, you know, put a system into a building that in 10 years I'm going to be retrofitting, that's going to cost the tenants even more money. You know, we try to figure out what's the balance there. How do we, you know, straddle that line between what's financially feasible and what's going to provide the best end product to whoever the end user is, in terms of longevity and in terms of, you know, basic cost savings.
Yeah, that's great. And Ryan, how about your own work and how you sort of define this notion of high performance?
Thanks, Yitza. We have a fairly simple definition that is certainly not inclusive and where we're going to be, say, 10 years or 15 years from now. But right now our standard is the maximum number of units that are net zero on an annual basis for all loads, including heating and cooling, at the lowest cost per square foot possible. And, you know, that's our guiding light. And we believe that if we can deploy as many units, you know, regionally as possible, over time, you know, we can address better, you know, things like embedded carbon, and you know, we're constantly improving the livability of the units, but maximum number of units, net zero, for the lowest square footage price.
The dog wants to go out, just so you know.
She has a trick where she lets herself out the gate. It's pretty impressive.
That is pretty impressive, actually. So, you know, you all sort of develop your own projects to some extent or another, and I'm curious about, you know, the phase that sort of most of us never see is the whole pre-development phase, all the work that goes into trying to make a project happen before it's a project, and I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of what barriers you might have seen in your pursuit of higher performance projects. You know, are banks less receptive because there's sense of increased cost, or, you know, what other barriers do you see during that sort of pre-project, pre-development phase? Ryan, do you want to start?
Sure. So by far, the largest obstacle we have, and I think most developers can understand this, is a local approval process. And you know, we find ourselves always in an interesting position where we are, you know, and I think it speaks well to a lot of communities where we're being invited in, and that's fantastic. However, a lot of times that inclusive attitude from, say, a town supervisor or city council doesn't propagate down to, zoning. It doesn't propagate down to, the process for getting civil work, approved and a project fully entitled. I think that it's something that municipalities recognize as an issue, and many are addressing through, rezoning efforts. And I would say that, one step that would be, fantastic for municipalities to consider is to, start that pre-development work on a lot of these infill sites ahead of time. It doesn't mean that the municipality has to have skin in the game long term. It doesn't mean that, it actually means that they could even come out ahead on that work. But a lot of the sites that are key to develop are sites that are walkable, are sites that are in urban areas, near urban areas. And frankly, that is sustainable development. Putting, 500 units 5 miles outside of town where it's greenfield development, and it's easy to develop. Sure, you can get to net zero, but you're increasing, the impact of transportation. And I think that is something that there's a whole heck of a lot of fantastic walkable urban infill sites, in upstate cities. And I think that's by far our biggest obstacle.
Is that obstacle often local residents that don't want more apartments in town, or have some sort of, proclivity against that? Or is it more that the regulatory process is just complicated?
It's you will get a little bit of NIMBY pushback, or a lot, depending on the areas. That's certainly true. We try to push back with, data that says that, well-planned multifamily development, can actually raise values, or at least maintain values. And it's and frankly, but we don't worry too much about that. I mean, we believe in our projects. We know that they're good for the residents, and we know that we do have an inclusive model in our development. And but what is the bigger issue is definitely the patchwork of regulation across upstate. We focus obviously on New York, and you can go into one town and it's a 3-month approval process, streamlined with a planned unit development, and you're underway. We're on another site right now where it's been 2 years, and it's for actually less units. And so there's a lot of difference town to town, and so you end up creating a bit of a war room map, and you start to identify, again, you're not identifying locations that you can take advantage of, or who don't have, comprehensive zoning review. That's not the case at all. In fact, that 3-month project I mentioned was actually more comprehensive, and they stated, the requirements more upfront. And it wasn't this, gingerbread crumb trail that we had to follow for 2 years. And so, that's something that municipalities can do right away, to really encourage development. And it's, I recognize it's being done in some areas, but it's definitely an obstacle.
I mean, it seems like that idea of getting municipalities to get involved in that, do a bunch of that pre-development work would help with both strains of kind of barrier. That if the town is the one saying, we need a building here, it needs to be of this scale in this location, that would probably preclude a lot of the concerns that people might have about a developer trying to do something cheap and make a bunch of money quickly kind of thing. It's sort of one of the, anyway, it seems like a really, really important thread to kind of try and push municipalities on. So Zavilla and Vogue, sort of turning to the work that you have been doing, what are you finding sort of in pre-development in terms of barriers?
I think I sympathize with Ryan because I probably spent the last 25 years in New York City butting up against those concrete walls in terms of development. So I think for us as a firm, once we decided to do development independently and not just me working with developers as an architect in New York City, our vision and our model is slightly different. And it's trying to find the path of least resistance. So typically we're looking at communities that have been underserved or that are in transition, where they're desperately seeking development and quality development to come in. And so that sort of model has been working for us thus far in terms of trying to identify sites and finding people who are in local governments who would be supportive of the vision that we may have coming to their community. We try also to be sensitive to the fact when we're not from that particular community, that people are like, well, who are these other people coming in here wanting to do this work, right? So then that's where the cultural sensitivity comes to play. And my expertise in community development projects, just trying to identify who the true stakeholders are and having open lines of communication with those individuals to not say, you know, it's us coming to do something for you, but that we'd like to work with you as a strategic partner to do something collectively that will better the community and enhance its value. And so it's a different sort of model. Speaking specifically to the sustainability question, the projects I've worked on in New York City have largely been more passive house kind of projects. And New York City seems to be really focused on energy efficiency and all things global climate change right now. So the government and agencies are very receptive. Almost every day they're sending out new, memos or bulletins and support and telling us we must be doing X, Y, and Z. So to that degree, practicing in New York has not been a challenge. And in that regard, I'd say, I guess I was about to skip to construction and we're really talking about pre-development. So I would just say in terms of pre-development, it's not been really hard. People have been understanding and supportive, and agencies appear to be willing to put a little bit more subsidy dollars behind it to make sure that those things are being done. So Vogue.
Right. From my end, I would say one of the first places that I stop when I'm looking at a development project is at the local neighborhood community meeting. Like, I want to understand what vision do the people who live here, walk these streets every day have for themselves? And then we build around that. We try to enhance on what they have already brought to the table. I know, I am born and raised in Harlem in New York City, and one of the largest criticisms that I hear as I walk down the street is most of the people that I know who have lived there their whole lives say, all this new development, who is it actually for? Because it doesn't seem to be for the people that have historically been there. And I think that that's one of the main things that we try to combat when we move forward with our development projects. I come from a background of affordable housing. I, on the community level, worked at a not-for-profit for over 15 years. And one of the biggest things that I realized working there is that a lot of times developers come and they really don't know, what's the most pressing need. I was trumpeting around the office, every project we do should have a grocery store, and they kind of were laughing at me saying it was a pet project of mine, but I had babysitted some children in the Bronx and I wanted to just get some extra groceries, and I had such a hard time finding a decent store to buy food from. And lo and behold, a few years later, the city released a program where they actually were providing incentives for additional square footage if any developer added a grocery store, because the Bronx was a food desert. So it's those sorts of kind of ground swelling ideas that come to me and that we try to infuse into our projects while maintaining the balance of, all these other things. And as far as working outside of the city with zoning issues related to energy efficiency, I find that New York City has been very good, but overall, New York State, I feel they're trying to push the building code into the direction where kind of a lot of these energy efficiency things will soon become standard. So, the things that we push for that people may believe are extras and why are you trying to do that? Really, if anybody was paying attention, these are the things that are coming down the pike that everybody is going to have to do. So why am I even going to, spend time modeling a building of the past when I should be focused on what the building of the future is going to be? Yep. And so, that's kind of how we approach this.
Yep. You're building the future. That's, I think that's a point that Ryan made when we were speaking before the panel at one point. Mm-hmm. I mean, we talked a little bit about barriers, like who have been really important allies or advocates for these higher performing projects as you try to get them off the ground. Vogue, maybe you could start us off on that one.
Yeah, from my perspective, early on in my career, I felt like really there were no allies. Everybody was more just looking for the cost savings. How can we get this done, in the most inexpensive manner possible? But I think that now I'm finding a lot of allies among lenders, actually. The banking industry, I think, is taking stock as to how their older buildings and older assets are performing. There are major issues with flooding, major issues with energy retrofitting, and it's just not smart, to continue to build these older buildings that are inefficient and that are going to be outdated once they're completed. So I think that lenders and policymakers really need to push developers to focus more on, follow the money where we're going in the future.
Great. Zavilla, how about yourself in terms of allies and advocates that you've relied on in previous projects?
I think the organization I was doing passive houses for is Restore Homes in New York City. So they're a client that actually came to us and said, we want to build this way. So again, what I've found more recently is that I'm no longer having to convince people of this. At least the clients that we've been engaging with seem to have some awareness and some desire, and we're advocating this process for themselves. And the private sector, I have, introduced the concept to our clients, and no one has said no. Everyone is always interested in, does it cost more money? That's for sure. But, my sensibility is that there's no architect that wants to wake up in the morning and say, can I put toxic paint in your building? Let's put flooring with formaldehyde in it and all of these things. So, I mean, you can find really true sustainable products on the market and energy efficient equipment. And in today's world, honestly, I don't feel it's adding, 50% to the budget anymore. Maybe that's what was happening 20 or 30 years ago. But I think that all manufacturers, all, people who create goods for the construction industry are sort of understanding that we need cleaner products, so you can find lots of recyclable materials for finishes and all kinds of things that are somewhat on parity with standard construction materials. So I just think that we're in a transition and a pivotal point in the construction industry where the tide is sort of turning toward cleaner buildings without it adding significantly to the costs. I think the idea now is when you deal with this sort of carbon neutrality or net zero, can you get to net positive? So people are starting to try to say, okay, I get all of that, but can I make money from it? So now that starts to be the challenge. Can I sell energy back to the grid? And right. So I think that that's the next step that will be pushing the frontier of, can we sell energy back? So I think that Ryan is way ahead of the game when he's 30% positive. And so I think that his model, people can look at and maybe learn, how they get to the positive side.
Yeah. And Ryan, that 30% figure, who are the sort of allies and advocates that were important in helping you get to that point?
Well, you have to start with the money. And because we've talked with plenty of banks over the years, and the initial meeting always goes like, that's cool what you're doing. And then about midway through the set of meetings, it's like, so what would the numbers look like if you cut the solar, or
right.
How much cheaper could we get natural gas forced air in the units in there, versus heat pumps, which is ironic on that last note, because last time we ran the analysis, our gas forced air, capital cost was higher than the air source heat pumps that we're using.
Wow.
So that's just an outmoded question.
Yeah.
But we get them. And it wasn't until and I'm going to do a shameless plug here, but it wasn't until we ran into Community Preservation Corporation that, I'm sure they're not the only lender that's moving in this direction, but they were the first one that just from the first meeting, it was a breath of fresh air, because we didn't have to address those questions. We didn't have to come in immediately on the defensive. And, we aren't a massive development company, and our time is one of our greatest resources. And so when we spend, with a traditional lender, days upon days, on the underwriting, justifying the core elements of our product, it's not only a resource drain, it's demoralizing. And so, CPC came in and I was just like, nope, we get it. That's why we want you. And, how do we do more? And so, that was just a breath of fresh air.
That's great. I mean, the demoralizing factor is something I think that is not spoken of enough. If you run into that wall enough times, right? Like adrenaline is a resource. Like you only have so much of it before you're like, okay, I'm just going to do the normal standard thing that everybody seems to want and get through my day. And it's a testament that all of you have been focused on this for so many years and have continued to go after these goals, given, the barriers I know that you all sort of run into. Once you got a sort of a project really underway, you then have to collect the right set of team members. I'm wondering if you've all had, has it been challenging to find the right partners, whether it's your engineers or contractors, to sort of that are also sort of aligned in this mission and willing to put in the kind of, extra oomph that these kind of projects need to kind of get them over the line?
Well, interestingly enough for us, when we made the initial decision that every project we would do going forward would be carbon neutral and net zero, I called around to quite a few engineers, MEP engineers that I worked with previously, and explained to them what I was attempting to do to see if they wanted to just form a strategic partnership up front to do all of this work going forward. And I was told no by quite a few people that no, we don't do that. And I was just floored by that response. So I kept searching. I actually Googled and did internet searches at a certain point. And I came up with Tatum, and I just called them out the blue. And I explained to them who I was, what I was trying to do, and said that I wanted a strategic partnership. And they were like, you found the right people. And I was very happy. And great. So I'm very happy, that we're working with Tatum. We use them as the net zero consulting engineers. And we still keep, other engineers on the side as the engineers of record, particularly in New York City. But we work with Tatum. And so that was just an interesting process to me. I don't know if Ryan had the same experience, but I was actually floored that people weren't doing this from the engineering side.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We had, have had similar experiences. We have a volumetric modular product. So by its very nature, it has to be engineered and then approved at the state level in order to bypass the local officials' jurisdiction on the inspections behind the wall, right? Because you're getting it brought to site with, where the drywalls of all the electrical rough, plumbing rough is all done. And, so there's plenty of engineers who do that. We have to fight with them to say, no, the solar has to stay on the roof. They keep taking it off. Like, put the solar back on. It's just because that industry in particular, the modular housing industry, it has not done that. And so, that's a big part of our special sauce is we do the solar in the factory, and that gets our installed cost per watt just above $1 a watt for equipment and labor. And, that if we were to do that on site with a subcontracted solar installer, I mean, that's what we used to do. That's $250 a watt all day long. So, 2x the price. So, there is that kind of, just, even when something is so baked into our core philosophy, getting, the engineers to look at that as an exciting challenge. I mean, I'm not impugning anyone for not having done something before, but we are looking always for people who see that as an exciting challenge of how to grow their, skill set versus trying to work around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably true that there's more people out there that see those exciting challenges as risk rather than, unfortunately. So you have to work hard to find those folks that really are energized by that idea. Then when you get into construction, I mean, is it the same? Have you had the same challenges finding the right contractors? I mean, I guess, Ryan, in your case, it's, those are your employees. So it's a little different maybe than Zavilla and Advogue's process. But have you had, I mean, presumably there are subcontractors you have to use for, I don't know, site work, that kind of thing. And is it a challenge to find folks that are, willing to do things this different way? I mean, offsite modular construction is a really totally the inverse model of the building a one-off gem for every project that we piece by piece on site.
Well, and as background for the people attending, our methodology of this is that we build one building. So we have the Henry Ford model of multifamily. You can have whatever you want as long as it's a 22,176 square foot building, 3-story, 25 unit. And so, that obviously means that we're involved in the pre-development work and site selection and involved in the development process. So that, to get back to your question, what that means for us is that, yes, we have to have civil contractors, foundation contractors who, really understand what we're doing. But from that perspective, we can issue the exact set of plans. They could bid that, and just as if it was any other, carbon project. And so, we really are trying to take the, in fact, a lot of times in that bidding process, I won't mention that it's net zero. I won't mention any of the sustainability features to those subcontractors. One, because it's immaterial to the foundation design as long as they follow the plans. Right. And two, I don't want to have someone trying to, bid up the process or add hours to the engineering because of a perceived difference in what that final product is going to be, when for things like civil and foundation, there is no difference. And then last final point is, for labor, we've been quite fortunate, even in this tight labor market, to not only retain our team, but acquire really fantastic new people as well. And so, And I think a lot of that has to do with the, with our mission. You can, you tend to forget that the guy hanging drywall or the gal doing electric is cares about what they're doing. In construction, the people start being treated like a commodity. Oh, can that person do that task? Yes, they need X for payment. Done. They care deeply about what they're doing, and they're doing it all day long. They should, and or else we'd all go crazy. And frankly, it does make a difference to them that they believe in a larger, more holistic sense in the mission of the company, even if they're wiring outlets all day. There is an overall sense of mission, and that's really helped with our retention and growing our team.
I think that it's great that Ryan has an in-house crew that he continues to work with them and develop them along the way. Over the years, I've found that the product that you get can be wildly different from contractor to contractor. I think that one of the things that I definitely learned throughout my career has been quality control, the importance of letting the professional be the professional. I know many times as a developer, whether in the affordable housing world or developing our own projects, sometimes you have this tendency to want to like step in and say, well, no, do it like this or do it like that. But a lot of times there are, very specific reasons as to why one thing should be placed somewhere or built in a certain way. And I think that for our projects where we do build on site, quality control, checking, double checking, triple checking, building in those control mechanisms is essential. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be willing to take the liability to make sure that the building continues to stand, So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with what Vogue said also. And I think it's interesting because basically Ryan has developed a building and he's looking for a site. And so it's different from us to the degree that we do site-specific buildings. Whatever site we get, we just figure out what the building should be. And I do think that, the end product can vary vastly depending on the contractor that's involved. What I've found as an architect, whether it's a sustainable building or not, is that the architect or whoever's in charge of construction administration has to do their due diligence. Because when you talk about air sealing, proper insulation and all of this stuff and fire stopping, is it done the way it's supposed to be done? Someone really has to be willing to take charge of that quality control. And usually that's whoever's in charge of construction administration, whether it's an architect, a construction manager, or engineer. And so Ryan has sort of built this into his model by evolving his own team that he works with. But when you work with a different set of people on every job, then you sort of have to accept that responsibility, because you'd hate to build this building and then find out that, people didn't put the caulking where they were supposed to put it. And, so you have all these air drafts. So you have to be really diligent, and you have to be focused and you have to be meticulously there and overseeing to make sure that this stuff is done.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of these projects. I think that, there's in any project, there's a sort of series of gatekeepers, right? That there's some of local officials, residents in some case, when there's a heavy kind of community engagement process. And I'm wondering what you feel are the benefits that are sort of most attractive to those gatekeepers, the things that are convincing them that this is the right way to push things.
I think sometimes you have to be your own advocate, and you have to have confidence in what you're doing and know that what you are bringing to the table is something of value. And at that point, it's almost like you're a salesperson. And like in my case, I think I shared the story with you guys earlier that at some point, when you talk about broadening this definition and scope of sustainability in New York City, when I was a young architect, I had to convince people that we should have garbage rooms in the building, that it was improper to build a building and then take the garbage cans and chain it to the front door. So, I had to become an advocate for the end user in that regard. And, I went as far as to take a photographic essay of buildings all over Harlem that had garbage cans chained to the front door that HPD had spent a lot of money developing. And seeing it in a photographic essay, they, their eyes sort of bulged. They were like, okay, you could do those garbage rooms, right? So, and so it sort of becomes the same thing with what we're doing on a sustainability level. One of my friends told me recently, I can show you better than I can tell you, right? Yeah. So someone like Ryan that actually has hard data now that you can confer with, and he becomes a professional colleague of ours. We talk to him, and so now you start to have actual material you can put in front of people, and you just show them that this is the result of what you're doing. And so I think, we're slowly turning the ship as a society, but it will take advocates within the market, whether they're builders, developers, or architects, to continue to push it forward for those who are naysayers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I want to say, New York City and some other municipalities around the country are very progressive in how they are facing these climate change and addressing it in the energy code. And I think that some smaller municipalities will also begin to really get on the bandwagon as younger and younger people join, steering committees and community boards and different things of the like. I think that a lot of times people get stuck in the notion of, well, this is how we've always done it. And, a lot of younger people are saying there's a better way to do it. And I think that once those two kind of meet in the middle, we'll see progress speed the same way the computer came and now, everybody is walking around with a smartphone. I think it's just going to catch on. Yep. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yep. Ryan, anything to add there?
Just backing up what Isabella said, I mean, seeing is believing, and it really does help that these projects are coming out of the ground. And we had, quite a few people who believed in us early, but there's that early adopter group, and then there's the, I forget the term, there's a term, but right below the early adopter group is kind of that still early, but kind of needed to see it happening group, and then you've got the, the group below that, which is going to be kind of the last adoptees, the more reticent folks. That second group is a huge group. It's municipalities, it's a whole bunch of financial institutions, it's a whole bunch of developers and such who want to build good projects, want to build quality projects. And, we, that group, was skeptical of our approach and being able to take them through, our first solar village and see it in real life and see the residents bustling about and be able to show them the hard data. It certainly makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I'm interested in the extent to which you all have a continuing relationship with the tenants in your projects. Maybe in some cases you do, in some cases you don't. But how is these higher performance buildings, how has that altered your relationship with the folks that actually use these buildings, do you feel?
Unfortunately, for us on our end, we don't maintain a relationship with the occupants once we finish. For institutional clients, we do to a large degree because they tend to become repeat clients. Right. But where we do buildings and it's just simply a rental or it's a condo or it's a home for sale, we sort of move on. The general contact we may have at a later date is that some clients actually will call us and say, they moved into something that we designed, and they literally will search out our name and call us and say thank you, that they can tell someone who cared designed this environment. And so that's always a welcoming call. But beyond that, we don't really have contact.
Yeah. Ryan, how about what's your situation like with the tenants?
So we do have long-term, relationships there, and part of our model is to develop an app that will, there's plenty of apps out there that are for tenant management. We have a fantastic VP of management who has a long track record of working with properties and tenants, and we see that kind of deep experience mating really well with technology to really stay connected with the tenants and the performance of the building. And it's not a situation where we certainly we want to know how the building's performing, and have everyone's interested in that data, other developers, NYSERDA, CPC. But what I'm really interested in is putting that data in a very easy and intuitive format for the tenant that gives them buy-in into the energy environment of the building. And we don't believe in shaming, but we do want someone to know if they are the biggest user in the building. And conversely, we want them to know if they're the most efficient user in the building, but no one else would know that. You would only see where you fall within the building. Everyone else's names are anonymous. And the goal there, is to give people real time, very visualized, and we care a lot about user interface. So, making that screen very simple and understand where their water usage is, where their electrical usage is. That's coming. The systems are already in place. We've already installed those systems, but that user interface still has work to do. And then, the nice thing is then you have a nice home screen, so to speak, for people living in these spaces where they can request maintenance, where they can, pay their rent, where they can see about community events. And the community event side, I think, is really important because the other part of all this is, when you start talking about sustainability, is getting, the first step is to get, for us, our philosophy, the first step is to get the building there, to have a high quality building, to have the shelter, constructed. The second step is to build a community within that building and around that building for two reasons. One, it drastically increases the quality of life. If there are, community gardens, a lot of our developments, even have chickens. There's a really, you'd be surprised how enthusiastic a lot of people are about those outside the building community features. Outdoor living spaces, fire pit, walking trails if the site is more on a rural setting. And having an easy to get to app where you're seeing what events are coming up, and having people where we are spending money on the management side to encourage those events and to create space and resources for those events. But the events are dictated by the residents. We're not trying to create an agenda. The community needs to decide how they're going to manage that environment. And what does that do? It'll reduce maintenance and management costs of the facility. So there's a baked in financial incentive for developers to do this, because when people care about the space they live in, when they care because everything that they put into it, they're getting back twofold in their quality of life. Well, then the tenant property manager relationship becomes less adversarial and more collaborative. And I think that's, something that perhaps gets overlooked when we talk about, building performance is
I mean, one of the questions from the audience is, how you go about ensuring the community voice is sort of reflected in a given project. And it sort of sounds like, in your case, Ryan, to some extent, that's about almost the amenities that the project makes available to those folks, as opposed to just the building itself, because you're reproducing to some extent the same building in different places. And Vogue, you spoke to this already, and it's interesting to me to think about the differences of what people mean when they talk about community voice in different communities. So if you're building, like Ryan is, an apartment building in a small town in upstate that is desperate for new development, how that community voice is reflected is a very different question than, as you were describing earlier, in Harlem, where you have a lot of projects that are the seed of displacement of longtime local residents and things. And I'm curious about all of your sort of experiences with that community engagement process, and how to navigate that successfully.
Yeah, I think for me, especially coming from, as I mentioned, a background in affordable housing, a lot of what I do when I interact with people is educate them about what affordable housing actually is, because a lot of people think that affordable housing is housing for poor people, and that's not what affordable housing is. Affordable housing is housing that allows a person at any range of income banner to, pay a certain ratio of their income toward their housing. And that means that person could make $100,000 or that person could make $40,000. But the question that I always try to resolve with, now with my mom is basically, what kind of space do you provide? Is it only the person that makes $100,000 that gets a quality space, and the person that makes $40,000 gets like a broom closet? Who's able to access the garbage room? There was a big fight in New York City just even about developers who would utilize, the FAR boost that they get from adding in affordable units. And then they would basically say, well, you guys are on the lower income, so you enter through the back door around the corner on the side of the building. And then everyone else who's, at a higher income comes through the main entrance with the lobby and, the concierge desk. And I just always was highly offended by that. And I just feel that everybody at every income level deserves to have a quality space. And if part of that quality space is making sure that, on top of the rent burden, that they're not also burdened with energy cost and tiny, small little corners of a space that don't get good light, those things are important. And those things go directly to what Ryan was speaking about before, that, people have to have a sense of ownership over where they live. They have to have a sense of pride and a sense of dignity as they move forward through their spaces. They want to be able to invite people to their homes and have their children go up there and not, feel poor based on their environment. And, I think that is a big part of what we think about when we do our projects. And we're always striving not only for energy efficiency, but just overall design excellence, just making sure that people have a sense of pride of where they're coming home to.
Absolutely.
I just want to jump in. I don't want to get lost on a point that Ryan made about tracking the energy efficiency of units. I found that really intriguing, and it resonated with me because we know in New York City now, buildings get energy ratings, A, B, C, or D, based on how much energy you are using. And so I think it's like really cool to start to think about a model where the apartments get a rating. That I can see that being a next step, that it's not just about the building, but that each apartment can get a grade for how their electric and water usage. And I say that because in talking to Tatum and talking about net zero, what I've come to understand is that I don't care, and they were saying we don't care what we actually model, the biggest variable in a building that we have no control over whatsoever is the occupant. So we can model, how much heat the refrigerator generates and all of this stuff, but we can't control when the person is going to open and close their window. We can't control if they're going to go out as soon as the building is bought, is occupied, and buy a piece of equipment that is not energy efficient. I talked before about just keeping your computer screen powered down to 50% brightness and how that can affect energy consumption in a building. So that's the fact that we cannot control. And so what Brian talked about is a way to start to monitor that, not in a way where you put it in enact punitive measures, but it just helps you to understand more as we go down this road for where we would like to be 50 years from now. So I just wanted to add that.
That's great. I mean, I think there are a bunch of, we're going over time a little bit, but there's a bunch of really interesting questions from the audience. I mean, one was specifically for Ryan, whether you're considering, I don't see the question now, but one is whether you're considering doing smaller unit buildings. I guess you already answered that. I see. Okay, so you answered that in writing. Gotcha. All right, you stole my thunder there. That's all right. That's all right. But one of the other questions here is sort of how you all stay connected to the development of technology in our industry. How do you keep track of what system's going to be available in the next few years and how that might impact your work? Or is that a focus?
Yeah, I would definitely say yes. I think it's important. I try to go to trade shows whenever I can. When you go to professional conferences, they usually have trade people there, and you can really find out about some cutting edge materials or different equipment coming to the market. And, it's always important to read trade magazines and things of that nature. A lot of stuff comes through the email box. I'm still sort of a print kind of person, so I have a lot of magazines. I know that's not PC to say, but I am. So I still finger through engineering magazines looking for different technology, particularly HVAC systems, electrical magazines, and things of that nature. So I think you always have to be looking for what that next product is, as well as following the codes, because the codes will dictate what's going to come anyway.
Yeah. Ryan, anything to add there? Then we will we'll probably finish up.
I do have to credit NYSERDA there a bit, not a bit, quite a bit, because those incentives are a huge part in driving sustainability and have driven sustainability across New York State. And what the incentive does specifically on technology is it pushes someone like myself to say, okay, if we're getting X dollars per watt on the solar, what is our best return on that investment in terms of what product we select? So you do the same cost, quality, benefit analysis that you do on any other product, but then it also leads to performance analysis. And I think that's a really key metric that sometimes gets lost is, I'll give you a real quick example and then I'll shut up, is, air source heat pumps. We're a big fan of air source heat pumps. And you can, there's some numbers in there that are really important, like coefficient of performance is basically saying, compared to electric resistance, how many times more is the system going to be, how much less energy is it going to produce for the same BTUs? However, there's also a little tidbit in there you have to worry about in long-term performance and tenant comfort, is that there's a BTU rating that is different than what's advertised, that's based on the lowest ambient outdoor temperature. And you've really got to design to that. Yeah. And I've seen, very good engineers skip over that number because it's just not something you worry about with natural gas units, Yeah. And so if you have a 2-ton air source heat pump, that only produces 1.5 tons when it's negative 17 degree ambient outside. Yeah. Well, that's when you need the 2 tons, yeah. Or whatever the design calls for. So, certainly some things that, but NYSERDA really pushes us to look at that stuff, and it really helps.
This has been a great conversation. My second time with all of you, and I've really, really enjoyed it. I hope very much we can all do this in person sometime soon. At Building Energy Exchange, we're actually starting to have in-person events again. Our first in-person event is actually this evening. If you're in the city, come down to Chambers Street and check it out. But in any case, I'm hope we all get to meet in person one way or another very soon. This has been fantastic. Joe, thanks to Pattern for Progress for inviting me to participate. And I will let you take it away to kind of wrap things up here. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you so much, and to all the panelists. Fabulous. I was jamming down notes. I couldn't write any faster than I possibly could. But there's a lot of major takeaways that I do want to spend just a minute going through those very, very quickly. Typically at the end of the webinar, I like to throw out a baker's dozen or 13 good takeaways, and I have a few more this time. So I'm just going to read through those very quickly for the participants. Local approval process is critical. Provides certainty to the developer. Pre-development work for municipalities on urban infill sites upfront is vital to success. NIMBY, always a factor. Look for the path of least resistance. Look at neighborhoods in great need with supportive municipal leaders. Cultural linkages and communications as strategic partners is vital to the process. Understand the local vision and design to enhance those assets. Designing and building to the future needs. Build strong relationships with lenders and policymakers. The added cost for cleaner and greener buildings with energy efficiencies are not that much more in costs. Build strategic partnership with engineers. Educate local officials and decision-making bodies on the benefits for the end users and the community. Quality control and due diligence is essential. Oversight is critical. Advocate for what you're doing. Bring and show confidence about your development. Showcase the results, and as the next generation of decision makers get involved, they're educated. Build a relationship with tenants. Build long-term sustainability and a higher quality of life. In real estate, it's location, location, location. It's also educate, educate, educate. Stay connected with the new tech, trade shows, conferences, and yes, printed magazines are cutting edge. Fabulous. So again, I want to thank absolutely everybody on this panel. This is wonderful. We've gone over, but we've only lost a few attendees, which is magnificent. So to close, once again, thank you to the moderator and the panel for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise. Again, our series will continue in August and September. And a special thanks to Community Preservation Corporation for their support and partnership with us on this series. I'd also like to thank our investors in the Center for Housing Solutions, and they include Howard Hanna Rand Realty, the Carney Group, of course CPC, Rupco and Hudson River Housing, the Leviticus Fund, TD Bank, Kirchhoff, Baxter Development, and of course NeighborWorks. Thanks again for continuing